September 15, 1942. Pressed against the Volga River, a handful of Soviets resist the German advance that intends to take the city of Stalingrad. The attack has been going on for 3 days of intense urban fighting, and the Germans have already reached the river bank in some points. Defense Chief Vasily Chukov needs to buy time in any way possible to organize a counterattack. For this, a young 37-year-old colonel appears accompanied by 10,000 men. They affirm that Stalingrad will be the tomb of Germany and that for them there is no land beyond the Volga. This is the story of how a young colonel and his division spearheaded Hitler's Third Reich when it seemed invincible. July 1942. Germany, having recovered from the fateful winter of the previous year, is about to launch a new large-scale offensive. Just 1 year ago, Hitler had decided to invade the Soviet Union, having on paper a maximum of 3 months to take Moscow. Germany's scarce oil reserves demanded that the war last that short time. Also from the National Socialist ideology, the Soviets were considered Untermensch, or subhuman, so victory would be guaranteed and would provide the fascists with the famous living space that they claimed to deserve. This distorted view of reality had been reinforced by the poor performance of the USSR in its war against Finland during 1940. In said war, the Soviets invaded the Finns but suffered enormous casualties, with 3 Soviets dying for each Finn who fell. This further convinced the German high command that Stalin's army was no match for the Wehrmacht, and that just kicking in the door would cause the whole house to collapse. But the reality proved to be very different. The massive invasion with 4 million men, although it had taken thousands of kilometers of territory, including Ukraine, failed to take Moscow, and what is worse, in the winter the Soviets managed to counterattack effectively, pushing back 250 kilometers to Germans. Hitler, after assuming the impact and seeing that his country did not have enough oil for a long-term war, decides to launch Operation Blue. This attack consists of advancing through southern Russia, and then turning downward towards the Caucasus, where 90% of Soviet oil resides. For this task, Hitler selects his best troops, led by the 4th Panzer Army and the 6th Ground Army, with which it is said they could assault the sky itself. If Hitler took over these oil wells, it would mean the end of the Soviet Union and the war in Eastern Europe. But if they failed, in the words of the Führer himself, the war for Germany would be over. In order to take the oil wells, the other important part of this plan is to protect the northern flank, which runs from Voronezh to Astrakhan. Protecting this flank will ensure that Stalin cannot pin down German troops descending through the Caucasus Strait. In the middle of this line is Stalingrad, a city of 500,000 inhabitants that has a thriving industry. Furthermore, the city is named in honor of the Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin. At first, the Germans intend to take the city without giving it much importance, but when facing increasing resistance Hitler orders to take it at all costs, although it is not a main or determining part of Operation Blue to take Baku. It is in this city where the bloodiest battle in history was fought and where the turning point in World War II would be marked. Towards August 1942, German troops enter the vicinity of the city, which has the Volga River as its final limit. The Germans under the command of Generaloberst Friedrich von Paulus have been wearing out since crossing the Don River and having traveled the 60 kilometers from that river to the city. Because of this, they already carry a certain amount of wear and tear for the huge fight that awaits them. As a prelude, the city is bombed by the Luftwaffe indiscriminately, causing everything to become a huge mountain of ruins. This largely prevents the advance of tanks and the use of artillery, leaving room for foot troops and snipers who take advantage of the rubble to hide and cause hundreds of casualties. Each building, each basement, each window is an objective to be taken and is disputed inch by inch. This house-to-house fight is nicknamed Rattenkrieg or Rat War. On September 11th, the Russian defender in charge of the city Anton Lopatyn confesses that for him the city is lost and that they must give him permission to retreat across the Volga River. Stalin immediately dismisses him and places Marshal Chukov in command of the 62nd Army. Marshal Vasily Chukov is a tough son of peasants, who upon taking charge of the city states, "We will keep the city or die." Chukov had been covering the south of the city facing the troops of the 4th Panzer Army. Now, the entire city would be in his hands. As soon as Chukov took office, on September 14th, the Germans launched several attacks that left them barely 100 meters from the main bank of the river. The Russians, who number barely 20,000 men, are exhausted and without reserves, with a huge line of wounded waiting on the shore to be transferred. It is in this desperate context that the 13th Rifle Guard prepares to cross the river and save the city from the German clutches. The commander of this division, Alexander Rodimtsev, shows up at the Chukov bunker looking filthy, and after receiving orders from him, he states that he is a communist and does not think of leaving the city under any circumstances. From the eastern shore, the city looks like an image of hell. You can see huge columns of smoke, destroyed buildings, and fires that burn incessantly. You can also hear the permanent sound of machine guns and artillery shells. Reinforcements under Rodimtsev cross on barges during the day and night under German fire. Even the colonel's ship suffers an impact, killing several men who were next to him. The Germans are quite fresh and confident, and hope to take the city in 1 or 2 more weeks of combat. In the first days of the attack they had managed to take almost the entire center of the city, but this overwhelming momentum would begin to change with the arrival of Rodimtsev and his men. Upon reaching the shore, 13th Guard reinforcements encounter 15 Russian tanks and several handfuls of units barely holding out. The Germans in some places are 100 meters from the coast, and reinforcements must immediately engage in combat. The German pressure is so high that the division suffers 3,000 casualties in the first 24 hours. The 13th Guard helps contain the enemy near the river and after receiving orders, ends up advancing and capturing the central train station. Rodimtsev's men also settle in Pavlov's famous house, where they will remain isolated for 2 months. In these critical hours, the reinforcements under Rodimtsev's command are pure oxygen for the Soviet defense. Hours before his arrival, the Germans had approached a few meters from General Chukov's bunker, and he had to invent a desperate defense to withstand the onslaught. The 13th Division is made up of mostly new recruits, having suffered huge casualties in May of that year in the Second Battle of Kharkiv in eastern Ukraine. But to make up for this lack of experience, Colonel Alexander Rodimtsev is in command, who had been named Hero of the USSR in 1937 for his performance in the Spanish Civil War. Their Rodimtsev, who was nicknamed Pablito, had acted as a Soviet advisor in the victory at Guadalajara. In addition to this, he had also led his airborne division and had been decorated for fighting in the Battle of Kiev in 1941. Beyond his experience and decorations, Colonel Rodimtsev is known for inspiring great courage in his troops and bringing out the best in them psychologically no matter the circumstances. For these men, belonging to the 13th Guard is the highest honor and, they say, they fear being changed divisions. The person who best describes Rodimtsev's personality is the writer Vasily Grossman, who interviews him in the middle of battle. Grossman asks Rodimtsev if he was exhausted by the constant stress of German combat and attacks that had taken place the day before, the night before, and which will continue tomorrow. Rodimtsev replies, "I'm calm, that's how it has to be. I've probably seen it all. Even my command post was attacked by a German tank and then a German threw a grenade in just to be sure of killing me. Just in time I was able to return the grenade and throw it outside my position. So here I am, fighting, and I will continue fighting until the last hour of the war." He answered quietly in a calm manner. Then, according to Grossman, Rodimtsev started asking about Moscow and they ended up talking about the current theater season. Returning to the battle, the 13th Division, in addition to repelling attacks near the coastal pier as well as fighting for the central train station, is dedicated to defending Mamiev Hill, which dominates the city due to its height and central location. Despite being repelled in the center of the city, that September 15th, the Germans advanced in the south of the city and also managed to take Mamiev Hill to the north. From the Mamiev Kurgan, the invaders could install cannons with angle of fire for almost the entire city and also the river, which was the main artery of the Soviet effort. This must be avoided at all costs, so Chukov sends the 13th Guard to retake the hill. On September 16th, Rodimtsev's disciples fought fiercely against the Germans for control of the mountain. Grenades fly every minute and we advance between craters towards the enemy sector to fight hand-to-hand with bayonet in hand. The air is covered by smoke and by the earth that remains floating due to the impact of the shells on it. The bodies of the fallen are buried and unearthed on their own due to constant artillery fire on the hill. The fighting is brutal, merciless, and relentless. After long hours and with the presence of Rodimtsev at the scene, the Germans are repelled by the 13th Division. During the following weeks this unit will give its soul and life to maintain the summit of Mamayev. Control of the hill will change hands very frequently, even at night, in a ceaseless struggle. Of about 10,000 men that make up the 13th Division, only 320 will leave Stalingrad alive. At the cost of many casualties, the Soviets managed to save the city on the critical days of September 15th and 16th. But the Germans would not go anywhere. They would continue to push and advance building by building, block by block. The landing of Rodimtsev and the 13th Division marks the beginning of 2.5 months of non-stop fighting, where both sides suffer thousands of casualties per day. Every night the Soviets send hundreds of wounded to the other side of the river and receive thousands of fresh troops, who serve to hold out for a short and valuable time longer. Towards mid-October, the Germans advance and take 90% of the city but do not finish expelling Chukov's forces, who does not hesitate to execute the officers who seek to surrender. After 2 months of urban fighting, on November 19th, the Soviets played their ace up their sleeve and launched Operation Uranus. This is a massive counterattack, with 1 million men which in a pincer movement, enveloped the German 6th Army in and around Stalingrad. The Soviets burst through the flanks, attacking the Romanian units that were covering the sides of the German attack. These divisions lack tanks or heavy weapons, so they are defeated relatively easily. Hitler, without taking into account the situation, orders the Germans to resist there and promises help from the air, although he does prohibit any attempt to retreat. In the encirclement that is nicknamed the Cauldron, there are 300,000 men who trust that the Führer will come to rescue them. The idea of a defeat against the Soviets, who they consider subhuman, is not even imagined by any German soldier. In the following weeks, the Soviets tightened the siege until they completely strangled von Paulus's forces. Aid from the air is a complete failure that fails to cover the basic diet of the soldiers trapped in the siege. For a day of combat, with a temperature of -15 degrees, the diet consists of 200 grams of bread, 100 grams of meat of any type and 20 or 30 grams of butter. This poor diet causes German soldiers to become increasingly weaker and morale to begin to plummet. Furthermore, the arrival of winter causes landing strips to freeze and flights to become increasingly impractical. Finally, the German High Command, becoming somewhat aware of the seriousness of the matter, organized a rescue operation for the 6th Army. They launch Operation Wintergewitter, led by Marshal Erich von Manstein. In the middle of winter and against all odds, the 4th Panzer Army tries to reach the siege of Stalingrad, but the most it achieves is being 48 kilometers away. From inside, Marshal Paulus refuses to try to escape, claiming that his men are very weak and that they lack gasoline. To eliminate Manstein's attempt, the Soviets launch Operation Little Saturn, with which they crush the Italian 8th Army and threaten the flank of the entire German southern front. With no other options, Manstein decides to order a withdrawal to prepare the defense of the front. The German tragedy is absolute. On the other hand, after the Soviet movement, the German forces in the Caucasus must be evacuated quickly to avoid being trapped. In that area, the invaders had advanced slowly due to the lack of fuel and the mountainous geography. The maximum advance had reached the town of Nalchik, about 700 kilometers from Baku. The Luftwaffe, seeing that they would not take said city, bombed the Soviet oil wells before withdrawing. If this had been done extensively, Germany could have denied the USSR almost all of its crude oil production. A decisive error for the conflict. After resisting the Soviet siege for 2 months, the Germans found themselves destroyed. Those who can still fight have frozen feet but try to protect themselves with blankets which are tied with cables around the body. The wounded and sick accumulate in the basements of the city that serve as hospitals and where air barely circulates. Doctors soaked in blood do everything possible to fight typhus, but the lice seem endless and jump from body to body incessantly. The deceased, frozen, are piled up in a corner so that they do not hinder the coming and going of people. Contemplating this panorama, a young German whispers, "They must never know in Germany what is happening here." By January 26, Rodimtsev's forces, still fighting as on the first day, managed to link up with the 62nd Army in the area of Mamiev Hill, thus cutting von Paulus's forces into two separate pockets of resistance. 4 days later, Hitler promoted Paulus to the rank of Field Marshal, ordering that a German marshal had never surrendered to the enemy and that if so he should commit suicide. General von Paulus, looking grim but not willing to commit suicide, signs the surrender of his army the next day, handing himself over to the Red Army. But the other German pocket, under the command of General Strecker, is still fighting. Without food or shelter, Strecker's troops resist the attack of 4 Soviet armies for another 48 hours. The attackers amass 300 field guns to annihilate the Germans. Strecker finally understands that the fight is no longer meaningless and surrenders on February 2, 1943, ending the Battle of Stalingrad. The Third Reich had been defeated like never before, with 22 German generals, 5,700 cannons, 3,000 mortars, 150,000 rifles, 12,000 heavy machine guns, along with thousands of vehicles of all types being captured. The tragedy is recognized with 3 days of national mourning and cannot be hidden from the German people, who find out through the following radio message.
Aus dem Führerhauptquartier 3. Februar 1943. Das Oberkommando der Wehrmacht gibt bekannt. Der Kampf um Stalingrad ist zu Ende. Ihrem Fahneneid getreu ist die 6. Armee unter der vorbildlichen Führung des Generalfeldmarschalls Paulus der Übermacht des Feindes und der Ungunst der Verhältnisse erlegen. Ihr Schicksal wird von einer Flak-Division der deutschen Luftwaffe, 2 rumänischen Divisionen und einem kroatischen Regiment geteilt, die in treuer Waffenbrüderschaft mit den Kameraden des deutschen Heeres ihre Pflicht bis zum Äußersten getan haben. Unter der Hakenkreuzflagge, die auf der höchsten Ruine von Stalingrad weithin sichtbar gehisst wurde, vollzog sich der letzte Kampf. Generale, Offiziere, Unteroffiziere und Mannschaften fochten Schulter an Schulter bis zur letzten Patrone. Das Opfer der Armee war nicht umsonst. Sie starben, damit Deutschland lebe.
The subhumans, or Untermensch as Hitler called them, had humiliated National Socialism forever. And what is even more important, from now on the Germans would only retreat until they reached Berlin, reaping defeat after defeat. Returning to the battle, of the 300,000 Germans who had invaded, about 90,000 surrender, and only 6,000 will return to Germany one day. Between both sides, the fallen and wounded total 2 million men. Somehow, Rodimtsev and 320 of his men managed to survive such a conflict. The survivors joined the 32nd Guards Corps commanded by Rodimtsev, and from Stalingrad they traveled 2,500 kilometers, participating in the battles of Kursk, Poltava, Dnieper, and Berlin. At the end of the war, Rodimtsev will receive the Hero of the USSR Medal for the second time for his leadership in combat. From now on, he would hold positions as a military advisor and, according to his son, once retired he would be visited daily by his former subordinates. After his death in 1977, various tributes were raised in Moscow, Stalingrad, and other towns and cities. Thank you for watching the video, and if you liked it, please consider supporting us on Patreon. Greetings and see you in the next video.